Welcome to Now Steaming. This is the podcast where we serve fresh hot takes from the millennial Chinoy perspective. My name is Stan C, and of course, alongside me are my collaborators. They are the co-creators of So Asian Comics, Kimberly Mas and Cedric Cheng. And before we get to this week's guest, man, we are at the season finale. I'm glad that we were able to put together an entire season of podcasts, and I'm pretty proud of how far we've come from the initial recordings where we would just bitch and moan and whine about us being in our late 20s, early 30s and having to figure out, what being a Chinoy actually means.
Right, this is the season finale, so I can't believe we're actually here recording this right now, but I'm super excited for our guests. And by the way, guys, I think the CNN documentary is still ongoing, if I'm not mistaken, guys. Yeah.
By the time you're hearing this, 4 episodes will have aired on CNN Philippines. Of course, the documentary is produced by Chinoy TV and directed by Emmy Award-winning filmmaker Mike Carandang. All 3 of us have been interviewed and featured in the documentary. It's called Chinese by Blood, Filipino by Heart. Said, I know you're very proud that you and Kim came up with that title when you first collaborated with Chinoy TV a couple of years ago. And the documentary is something you can catch on the CNN Philippines Facebook page. They've been streaming it over there. If it's not there, you can probably find it on cnnphilippines.com, or you can catch the replays Wednesdays when they upload it on the Chinoy TV Facebook page.
Yes.
Right. Now that that's out of the way, let's introduce this week's guest before we bring him on. He's one of my friends from high school over at Xavier. We used to be part of the Xavier debate team. That's really how we know each other. But he went on to take up his undergrad over at Tufts University in Boston. And then he went on to take his master's over at Leeds in the UK. And now he is serving the Pasig City local government as its transport chief. Please welcome to the podcast, Mr. Anton C. It's weird to call you Anton. I just got to say, because, I've known you as Rob for like half my life. So it's going to take some getting used to. But thank you for joining us, Anton.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thanks. And it's, a lot of people are getting used to it. Even I've had to get used to sort of like using a name I've used for a long time, but sort of rebranding in this field where in this field of transportation where my dad's also a practitioner. So I imagine it's the same siguro for professionals like doctors and lawyers who have to, have to differentiate themselves. Not because they resent what their parents' records are, but mostly just to avoid confusing people and avoid false advertising. Yeah, I mean, I'm super proud of my dad also being in transportation, but it's really more of a way to keep people from confusing, expecting to invite my dad to be a speaker and then they get me. So it's like they have to be disappointed and get the budget version.
Right. And I think it comes from the fact that you are a third, but you're Robert C. the third or Robert Anthony C. the third. So your dad is the second. So obviously the similar names will confuse people talaga.
Absolutely.
I mean, in the Chinoy community, there are lots of people with similar names, right? Kevin Tan.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that his situation is probably better than being called like, yung stereotype na you are blank son, like whatever the name of your father is, diba?
Yeah,
that's a typical Chinoy stereotype.
Wilson Tan or something like that.
No, not Wilson. So let's say Cedric, you had a kid, you'd probably name him Cedricson if you're like traditional stereotype.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my god.
Right, we're not gonna make fun of that anymore. We did that in the first few episodes of the podcast. Let's start by getting into your work, Anton. What does the transport chief actually do? So like I've seen your position on LinkedIn and in the many interviews you've done, but what really does the transport chief take care of?
Yeah, it's sort of funny because in the Philippines, of course, when you have a title like the head of transport, in many other cities around the world where local governments have far more control over the transport outcomes. Let's say, for instance, in like most cities in the States, you would expect the transportation department to take care of planning public transportation, of paying for it, of setting the charges, of really dictating most things related to land use and to traffic enforcement, even. A lot of times, even with the power to unilaterally set statutes and guidelines related to transportation. Of course, in the Philippines, it's actually very different. One key difference between transport governance in the Philippines compared to other countries is actually the government, for a very long time, has not had a lot of control over transport planning. And this is actually weird to say. And local governments actually have very little to no control over public transport routes, which are still planned and regulated by the LTFRB, the Land Transport Franchising and Regulatory Board. at the national level. So in practice, a lot of our public transportation is still in this nationally planned and controlled, but also at the same time privatized and fragmented system where you have hundreds and if not thousands of operators of jeepneys and buses, and they operate throughout all the cities of the Philippines, with the cities themselves actually having very little control over how public transport operates through their jurisdiction. Local governments don't actually set fares. They don't actually control where the routes run directly. Their control over public transportation is limited to planning infrastructure like stops, like pedestrian crossings, like waiting sheds. And in my role in Pasig City, I mean, sorry for that really long introduction, but
Yeah, go lang.
where I came into Pasig was really with the agenda of improving, sustainable transportation. So this covers basically, it's as advertised. We're trying to work on the modes of transportation that are better for the environment, better for the economy, and better for people's health. It means basically walking, cycling, and public transport. Anything to get people to be less dependent and less tied to their motor vehicles, or at least tied to the dream of escaping misery of transportation by owning a motor vehicle. So, in practice, in my job in Pasig City, that means improving things like bicycle lanes, bicycle parking, working on things related to public transportation infrastructure. We're always trying to find ways to creatively get a foot into improving the actual public transport service. But right now, we're like part of our role involves like cooking up projects related to improving things like waiting stops, like road safety, like pedestrian crossings, and even things as simple as street corners and intersections, which are much smaller projects than, say, airports or subway lines, but still very important. We don't take over traffic enforcement. That's done by another office. And land use, as much as we are actually finding ways to have more input into the sort of land use process of Pasig City, that's still mostly held by other offices in the LGU. So, that was a really long way of saying that, that we don't actually do as much as would be expected by the title in other jurisdictions, but it's still a very fulfilling job, especially, I think, with the kind of progress the Philippines is making today.
Mahirap ba yung trabaho as transport chief, given na sinabi mo nga, di ba, yung public transportation systems natin is very privatized inherently. So yung mga operators, yung mga drivers, technically we are at their mercy.
Well, I would say it's challenging, but I think I think it's important to make some distinctions here, because when you talk about like being at the mercy of drivers and operators, and I think this is also something which maybe I've had to explain to a lot of my relatives as Chinoys, basically. I think while many Chinoys, for instance, have experience with taking public transportation, at least at some point in their lives, not a lot of Chinoys actually go into this field. So not many are aware of how the industry is actually structured. Because, for instance, we like to talk about how, for instance, jeepneys and buses are so poorly maintained and how drivers drive so dangerously. But we also don't talk as much about how the government basically has not allowed them to raise fares, has made their the incomes of the drivers dependent on how many passengers are on their vehicles, and at the same time refused to invest in the kind of subsidy and improvement in infrastructure that will allow them to, for instance, put them on contracting schemes where they don't need to worry about how many passengers are on their vehicle. Diba?
So basically, yung boundary system.
Yeah, diba? I mean, like, we think we're at the mercy of like drivers driving dangerously, but they're also at the mercy of the boundary system, where if they don't drive dangerously, then they risk not having anything to bring home to their families, right?
No, that's a very good point. And as you said, you've had to do a lot of explaining on your end to yung mga Chinoy relatives and elders who aren't as familiar with your line of work, aren't as familiar with public service. So how do you explain it to them? Kasi siguro to give insight to this, tayong mga Chinoy, we stereotypically avoid careers in public service, avoid careers in politics, and this goes to our culture of trying to maintain a sense of harmony na ayaw natin ng gulo, di ba?
Yeah.
In Hokkien, mangtiowan ke, di ba? Ayaw mong gumawa ng away, you don't want to get involved in all of these disputes. So for someone like yourself who came from a Chinoy family, Chinoy household, was there any barriers to getting into this field, and what was the reaction from the family?
Well, I would say I'm very lucky in the sense that I've had a atypical at least for Chinoy families in terms of like how I got into this field because my father himself was he started out as an academic actually. I think back in the day because I think important thing to mention about my family is that I think my dad would already be fourth generation. So
Oh wow. Okay.
yeah, yeah. So it's funny. My great grandfather was born in the Philippines. So so at least in terms of like how long we've been around, yeah, I think our my folks have been around for a bit. So I'm not exactly sure. Siguro by the time my dad was picking a career for himself, I think it was still certainly unusual for for Chinese Filipinos back in his day. But at the same time, maybe his father and his father's father had already gone through some of these discussions already. And my dad, after having become an academic, started to work in the development field in different capacities. So I think maybe I was very lucky in the sense that my own dad was a little was very supportive of my career choice in a sense that he was already kind of in the field, and I think I always felt supported by my parents who never gave me any crap for wanting to get into things like government and development and public service. So
So nice na ever since
okay.
pala na you've had your foot in the door na rin. So that's why
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
easy for you to
yeah, in a way, and I think maybe like knowing siguro when my other relatives like knew naman how my parents were supportive of my career choice, I think maybe that also made them made like those with like negative comments or ideas less likely to give me shit about it because then they would hear it from my parents. So in that sense, I would say I'm very lucky.
So curious though, were there like negative comments or snarky remarks from your relatives when they know that you were getting into this line of work? Were there any?
Um, you know, I wouldn't say I wouldn't say it was necessarily about the field itself. Uh I think the interesting I think the more interesting comments I got weren't necessarily about the field, but maybe related to the government and the time I joined because my first job in government was in 2013 when I joined the DOF, the Department of Finance, under under Secretary Purisima, who was serving under President Noynoy Aquino,
Yeah.
who I think would be if I'm not mistaken, our second Chinoy president. So,
Yeah,
Yep.
following Cory.
so
Yep.
Well,
yeah. No,
I think Elpidio Quirino has Chinese blood too, so
oh wow, I didn't even think I actually left out Cory. So that I think if you count Aguinaldo and Carino, and if you count Aguinaldo and
It's a
Carino,
lot.
then
Yeah.
yeah, then
that's at
you would
least
have like
four,
at
Hmm.
least four, right?
right?
Yeah.
So yeah, let's get into that. The whole noy noy of it all, because you were part of that generation of millennials who were so enthusiastic about jumping into government and being a part of the Noynoy Aquino administration. And a lot has been said about it, especially in the wake of President Aquino's passing earlier
Yeah.
this year. So what motivated you to be a part of that wave of young people who just decided to be part of government?
Yeah. I think for me it was like I guess like the culmination of a sort of like political coming of age because I think you remember back when we were in like Savior debate. I think when you joined the debate team, even I think of course in Savior it's not unusual for Chinese Filipino kids to get into debate, obviously because of the school's population, right? But then that's really when you start to learn about a lot of social issues, start to read newspapers that cover more than just the Philippines, right? So I think for me, that was kind of like the start of my political awakening back in like I think 2003, 2004. So that was like those. So the issues at the time were like the Iraq War, the Hello
Yes.
Garci scandal of the last
Mm.
administration, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
I mean of
Yes.
the GMA administration, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I think there was a lot going on there, and I think for me, it was to start really planting the seeds of how I started to think about, well, what if it didn't have to be this way? What if we could actually start to work on a better country? What if we didn't have to live through scandals like this, right? So I think with the start of the Noynoy Aquino administration, I think there was a renewed sense of hope in the Philippines. I think to use like cheesy language about it, but I think you'll hear it from a lot of people. A lot of people chose to move back from the States to work here, to start businesses, to work in the government. Many people put off plans to migrate and instead, parang made bets on the Philippines here. And I think there was a really good energy going on back in from 2010. And for me, in 2013, I had already worked a job in the National Grid Corporation. I was looking for something else, but I knew I wanted to get into something like development and infrastructure. And I had heard from a friend that the DOF was hiring, another Chinoy friend actually, Gian Lau, who was my savior batchmate. He was working in Malacanang at the time and worked in Malacanang all the years of the Pinoy administration. And he
He was one of the
told me
writers,
about
diba?
yeah, of course. I mean, he was one of the one of the lead English language speechwriters of Pinoy, and of course, I think when Pinoy gave most of his speeches in Tagalog, he had more writers who wrote primarily in Filipino, but I think Gian was one of the chief ones doing it in English. So he told me that DOF is looking for people. He and some other friends in government, and so I sent my resume to DOF, and I joined the staff of Secretary Purisima. And so, I think it was riding that wave that really got me into the Aquino government back in 2013.
Yeah, wow. I mean, Anton, you're really, really, listening to you talk right now, you're really inspired, I guess, and you're really passionate about what you do. But just curious question though, like, has it always been transportation, like in your mind, like ever since you were in Xavier, or was there something else you wanted to pursue before transportation, or?
That's funny actually because not many people actually ask me that, and the thing is, I only started to think about when it was I fell in love with transportation. The first time someone asked me that, which was actually kind of recently, and I figured that there was a long period in my life when I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. But I was sure at the time that I wanted to move out of the Philippines because I really, really didn't care what I wanted to do, but I wanted to, at the time, live in a city with good public transportation. I wanted to not own a car. I wanted to be able to take trains everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
And I think I didn't know it at the time, but then that was actually what I really wanted, just like good transportation. It's what got me excited. It's what put a smile on my face. And I realized after a while that, like, hey, you know what? I can actually start working on stuff like this. So in the DOF, when I was working with Secretary Purisima, for a while, I was one of his executive assistants, which really just means, you had to be like a warm body who didn't panic. Anytime he needed something, you had to be the one trying to cascade his instructions throughout the DOF organization. And that was a challenging job for a bit. But after a while, what got me more interested was working on the public-private partnership projects of the last admin, where, that was one of the real flagship initiatives of the Pinoy admin, where you had projects that motivated private investment in public infrastructure. And, I still think we did a really good job there because one thing that the Pinoy admin did was they wanted to entice private investment in infrastructure by having competitive, transparent, and non-corrupt bidding for it. So once you had that, you had a lot of private participation. You had
What
a
a
lot of
concept.
good projects. Yeah, diba? I mean, like, who knew you could do that, right? So that was something that really took off, and I think we've seen some really good projects out of it. LRT1 is now managed by a private company. The Mactan Airport in Cebu actually is looking great. It's actually in many ways one of the best airports in the Philippines. If not, many ways, you just feel better flying to Mactan versus flying into Manila, right?
I heard it's
Because of
won
the
an
airport.
award. I think there's an award
Yeah,
for
yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, an award for like design or something. I think I saw that on
Yeah.
Facebook.
Yeah, speaking of like design and all of that, like the LRT 1 and 2, they have like really good graphics. I just have to comment.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
super
Yeah, yeah.
nice.
Absolutely. I think LRT2 actually commissioned their graphics from someone who initially mocked up the designs on Facebook. So,
Wow.
it's just like being able to tap talent like that is really important. But anyway, back when I did those projects, that's when I really got interested in transportation. I wanted to, I think when I was working on those, I really wanted to kind of like zoom in to focus on things like trains, like bus rapid transit is a mode of transportation that I still feel really passionate about, just getting buses to run better. But that's what got me motivated to apply for a Chevening scholarship and study in Leeds, where I did my master's. So Chevening is it's basically the British government scholarship for students coming from overseas to study in the UK. So I did that. I applied to study at Leeds, which has one of the best transportation schools in the world, and I still think it does. But interestingly, I became less of a subway and big project guy, and now I'm really more of a bike lanes, road safety, walkability, and environment guy. So it's funny how your career works out, but I still, I'm really happy generally with how it turned out.
Yeah, I see that a lot in your work. Obviously we've been Facebook friends for years and years, so nakikita ko talaga on my feed. And now you're one of the admins of the transportation Facebook group, yung How's Your Biyahe Best, where people just spitball ideas about how to improve walkability, road safety, transportation in general. Can you talk about that a little bit, like yung advocacy mo and how that's translated to this level?
Yeah, the thing about How's Your Biyahe Best actually is that a bunch of us got together. Actually, the ones who started it were me and two other fellow alumni from Leeds who had also done evenings after me. And we were like, hey, you know what? Why don't we get a group going? Because there's a very popular Facebook group based in the States called New Urbanist Memes for Transit-Oriented Teens. It's also called Numtot, but it's really it's really funny. It's like it's got hundreds of thousands of members and just people talking about like urban planning and transit issues in the US. But for me, you know what? I actually, I think, okay, with respect to my fellow co-founders, I think they had much higher ideals for how they wanted to be about discussion and like mobilizing into policy. And I really just wanted a shit posting group, man.
I mean, Facebook groups are where it's at, but that's why you've got Best of the Best Manila, Let's Eat Pare, all of these subtle Asian traits, subtle Filipino traits, and like these Facebook groups are basically online watery holes where, as you said, Anton, people can just shit post all they want.
Yeah, dude, I just wanted memes, man. I feel like one of the best ways to take discourse mainstream, especially in the digital age, is to really have good memes. Memes that are funny, but also like make the knowledge accessible. So it's like nice to share research papers, nice to share links to like new World Bank data or whatever. But I think the more important contributions from people have just been like the memes, and I think that's what's been missing in the discourse about transportation in the Philippines. We just needed to have a shitposting group, and I'm kind of glad that we fill that hole one way or another.
Yeah, it's good na people at least talk about it, diba? There's an avenue for people to like vent yung frustrations nila with the lack of bike lanes, the lack of pedestrian lanes, or freaking sidewalks. But so on a larger note, just to take it back to being Chinoy, I alluded to this earlier, how stereotypically and traditionally the Chinoy community is very averse towards anything political. So with you really not just dipping your toes, but going all in on this career in public service, what do you think about this Chinoy mentality na let's stay in our lane, mangchowan ke na lang?
Yeah. I think that's in a way you can't really blame a lot of like Chinoy families for I guess for having that kind of mentality, because when you look at you guys know, I'm sure you've discussed this in another episode, where you look at like the history of like Chinese Filipinos as first as a persecuted minority in the Philippines, even today as a group in the Philippines that many people still have outdated notions about. And recently, of course, when you start talking about things like the West Philippine Sea issue, a lot of people even recently, as recent as a few years ago, question the inherent loyalty of Chinese Filipinos in this country, right? So,
right. Have you ever been asked that question on TV or like in a media interview? Because these two have.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the funny thing is, I'm actually not sure. I'm actually not sure why people don't ask me that, but I haven't. I'm not sure if it's a good or bad reason that people don't ask me that, but I haven't.
Okay.
But that's the thing. It's like when you have a when you're a group that's been as persecuted as Chinese Filipinos have in this country, with that history, even if it's not as prevalent now, can you really blame people for having attitudes na parang, okay, I'll just like go home, pay my taxes, and that's it, And if by paying taxes means that I have to put a little grease money to make sure I don't get shaken down, I don't even blame people who do what they have to do to survive. I mean, especially when faced with a lot of these systemic problems in the Philippines, right? As if Chinese Filipinos are the only people that that sort of lubricate government transactions. We all know naman that it's not exclusive to any one racial group in the Philippines, right?
Yes.
But I would say that um, when you at some point though, parang when you're Chinese Filipino, part of being part of the Filipino side of that. I mean, I wouldn't say like it's even distinct from the Chinese Filipino identity, but at some point, it doesn't being Chinese Filipino and having that history doesn't diminish from, I would say, your social responsibility to this country and the people of this country, right? I mean, at some point you can say that like, okay, I'll go home, I'll pay my taxes, I'll vote for whoever. But I think people just have to honestly ask themselves, na parang, is that all you're happy doing? And for some people, maybe the answer is yes. But I would say that in some ways, if you're doing that, you're basically leaving a lot of the formation of this country and formation of this society to the people who answer that question differently. And I think as a group, as Chinese Filipinos, I would say it's not good enough it's not good enough to say that being okay with just like coasting and sort of like I guess like being having that mentality isn't always going to cut it.
Yeah,
Because
you make a very good point.
yeah. Is it because of like a lack of representation of Chinoys in the public service? So that's why I guess people tend to have outdated notions nga of the Chinoy community.
Well, it's funny actually. And I think here's where I'm going to try to be very careful about naming names because when you look through, let's say for instance, the names of like politicians or even senior government officials, the funny thing is there actually isn't a strict absence of like Chinese Filipino surnames, right?
Yeah.
You look through like many provinces and the political dynasties, are in some places actually have Chinese last names. So and you look through actually a lot of political scandals even throughout the last few administrations that you and I were alive for, right?
Yeah.
Right.
You'll find like Chinese Filipino names in the headlines. So
Yes.
yeah, so that's a funny thing to me. I mean, like if as a culture, as a racial group in the Philippines, Chinese Filipinos have this idea that we're supposed to stay out of politics, but somehow there are all these Chinese Filipinos who are in politics who we know about for the wrong reasons, right?
Yeah.
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 I'm gonna name an example, diba? Janet Lim Napoles. Lim is a Chinese name, diba? So
See,
that,
the funny
that's
thing.
that's as Chinese as it gets.
See, the funny thing is, I was thinking of somebody else. At least 3 other cases besides her. So that's a funny thing, diba? I mean, like if we, I'm not gonna say that anyone getting into government should do it with that kind of burden. That it's not anyone's burden to take on themselves to try and raise the reputation of Chinese Filipinos
Right.
in politics. But I think certainly, I think certainly there are many examples to challenge the notion that Chinese Filipinos don't get into government, don't get into politics. And I would say that if there's any notion worth challenging, that maybe it is that at the end of the day that there are many other ways to get into government, to get into the work of building a better society than being one of those guys, right?
Yep.
Yeah, ang ganda rin sinabi mo na for some people, hindi ka makukontento with just shutting up, paying your taxes, and being a good old Chinese Filipino citizen. Na, sometimes you really just have to do more. And in your case, when when you decided to roll up your sleeves and get into public service, that's exactly that. Or even siguro at a small micro level, being a registered voter, getting involved in the discourse in for the upcoming 2022 elections. Diba? Things like that, even yung mga ganung bagay, minsan pati yung community natin, iniiwasan na, di naman importante yung boto ko, isang boto lang naman yan diba? And I've been part of these events where I'm totally advocating for people to realize that no, your one vote absolutely matters because for one, it's the one time in 6 years na you actually get a say.
Yeah. Well, I mean, okay, I think that's the interesting thing though, because many of the people who don't vote frequently, and I don't mean to throw shade on you, Stan, here, but we have elections every 3 years. So
right, no, you're absolutely right. I even participate in barangay elections.
There you go. And the thing is, like, for a lot of other Chinese Filipinos, they're not even aware they're not even aware who their city councilors are, right?
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's super true. That's super true.
Diba? So I think it's also I think you're absolutely right that registering to vote and participating in that way is really important. And I think for a lot of Chinese Filipinos, real talk lang. I mean, like they're told by their parents that it's something you shouldn't do as part of that value where you don't rock the boat, you don't cause trouble.
Right.
But I would say that for a lot of people, I think we've also got to be honest with ourselves. That are you happy with not doing that? Are you honestly happy keeping that, or is it something that you've always not felt quite right about? Because I think for me, when I got into government, for instance, I guess going back to that, a lot of people, used to tell me that like, oh, parang you're so charitable, parang it's such a sacrifice giving up making money in the private sector. But
So
then,
romanticized.
I always found those statements kind of stupid, didn't it? Because for me, government work and working in this field that I work in, like I said earlier, it's what's always made me happy. And I would say that for a lot of people, actually working towards a better world and a better society is what makes you happy. And and I feel like it's not a good thing when you tell young Chinese Filipino kids to deny that, to stop dreaming that they can participate, to stop dreaming that they can change things, right? In a way, when you tell kids that to not make trouble, you're also telling them to like kill off a part of what they dream about, right? And for me, that's not exactly great. I mean, it sounds awful, actually.
I mean,
Yeah, it
I
sucks.
think, yeah, like if you keep the status quo, right? I think that's also what's promoting systemic abuse. Like if you just keep silent about it in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because most of the time, like Chinese Filipino parents, they're like, just let other people do it. Let other people do the burden, and then ikaw bahala ka na dyan, just do whatever you're supposed to do as a Chinese Filipino.
But
Pay your
yeah.
taxes, di ba?
You're paying your tax, just remain whatever, like just be comfortable where you are. That's it. But
exactly.
yeah, going back to like transportation, Anton, like how were you able to transition to the LGU? I mean, like it was finance before. I mean, I was reading up on your LinkedIn before this. Like you were in finance, then it became like transportation. So what was the transition like?
Yeah, it is kind of funny because after I think it was actually smoother a bit than my LinkedIn was suggested because I went from finance to studying transportation as a result of being exposed to transport projects. And from there, basically, I was looking around for what sort of transport projects I could do without having to rejoin the national government.
Right.
I think one could read many reasons into that, but I think for me, I was just looking for something different. I wanted to
I wonder why.
work on a. Well, I think one of the reasons was because I wanted to work on a smaller scale where I could hopefully get projects implemented more quickly. And I think after having studied transportation, that's when I also came to realize that there's a lot of transport work to be done, more than just I guess like the biggest of like the build. More than highways, more than airports, more than subways. Even things like road safety are important. Like even traffic humps are important. Bike lanes are important.
Yes.
Getting intersections to be safe for pedestrians and cyclists and public transport riders. Just even doing that kind of work is just as important as building a subway, and in some ways, and to some people, even more important. So I wanted to kind of look around for something to do related to that. And so in 2017, I became a consultant to the city of Pasig. So interestingly, this is before Mayor Vico won as mayor. So I was already a consultant for the city of Pasig then. And I've been lucky that I was able to continue in that work through to the Soto administration.
Hindi din ba siya coterminous? Kasi diba normally sa government lahat ng mga positions are coterminous. So if you started before Vico Soto took over, how did that happen to make it work out in your favor?
Yeah, that's another thing that that maybe I guess like misconception. It's another misconception that like Chinoys have of government sometimes, that actually the for people that aren't so exposed to government, there is that impression that when somebody wins an election, they just throw everybody out.
Yeah.
And bahala na, diba? But of course, for many reasons, in other organizations you can't do that, and in government actually, in some places that happens. But I think when you have a responsible person winning the election, you realize that it's not something you can do without I guess like passing on the serious costs of that to the public. So if you're a responsible person and you win an election, you actually want to transition as few people as possible. Without of course, like cleaning out the elements that really you can't have in your in your new administration anymore. For whatever reason, right? And there are reasons that you would want to get somebody out. But I think the attitude naman that Mayor Vico had when he came on was that actually he wanted to keep as many department heads as possible that were doing a good job naman. So luckily I was able to be counted among the people that he could keep on, and I think I like to think that we've done a good job and repaid that faith very well.
Siguro to put it into context na mas maintindihan ng listeners natin, let's put a sports analogy to this. Anton, I know you follow the NBA closely as well, diba? So in the NBA, very common yung turnover ng mga front office executives, diba? So pag nagkaroon ng bagong general manager, yung misconception is, fa-fire na yung coach, fire na yung coaching staff, back to zero na, rebuilding na naman. So, in an NBA team and in government, that can't happen all the time kasi sobrang gulo nun.
Yeah, that can't happen. See, and when that happens, you've got to know that it's a red flag, because I think when that happens when you have a new person winning who values loyalty over competence. I would say that if you follow actually the personnel changes in certain government offices, you'll see where that's not the case.
Right. Okay. Mm-hmm. I see what you're trying to say. Let's take it back to yung background more specifically, because we did mention you went to the States for your undergrad, then you went to the UK for your master's. Did you ever get yung comments from your family members, especially the more traditional Chinoy side of the family, na parang, oh, you're too Western na, you've been too inculcated by all these influences? Because that's something we hear a lot. Like in my own lived experience, I've heard it just because nag-UP ako. So parang sobrang kasi, di ba, UP, so naging liberal yung yung mentality ko, and I'm an English speaker. I like to talk back when I can and really push the envelope as far as I can push it. So did you get that because you went all the way to the States, into the UK, and came back?
Yeah, I think maybe in some ways, I'm not sure if this is the most helpful. This is the most helpful thing, but then it was already an experience that my parents had. I think for context lang, my grandparents had 7 kids. One of them was my dad, but all of the kids ended up either migrating or at some point parang they were living in the States na. Mm-hmm. So all of my dad's siblings are there except one. The one sibling who is here also lived in the States for a bit, and even my dad was working and living in Washington DC at the time. So siguro I'm not sure what to make of it, but then I think even with my other relatives, like the siblings of my grandparents, I think a lot of their kids also ended up in the States at one point or another. So siguro in my family, where I think you had a lot of Chinoys forming part of the Filipino diaspora and even the Chinese Filipino diaspora. Yeah. Maybe it was less of an issue, but I've definitely heard that from other Chinoys that I meet, that parents of friends who who I'm not related to. Mm-hmm. So yeah, in a sense, maybe it's okay, but then I don't know. I feel like medyo ka-wavelength ko kasi yung mga aunties and uncles. So maybe I'm
better in that sense,
maybe I'm better at navigating it.
Yeah, because I guess I wanted to ask parang how do you navigate that space, that more more conservative space na hindi ka nag-Hokkien, or you didn't have your traditional family business, you went into government, galing US to Western na, ay nako, all that shit.
I feel like in my barkada it's kind of typical because I'm not gonna name which friends talk about me this way, but then I think yung reputation in the barkada is parang I'm the friend that my friends tell their parents they're hanging out with when they're doing
it. You're the scapegoat.
Yeah, the scapegoat. But that's a good thing. That's actually a good thing.
It's not really a scapegoat, more like the decoy. Na parang kasama na si Robert or si Robert at the time. Kasi Robert, okay yan, he'll come home on time, ganun.
Right.
It'll be fine. So,
I believe Mian said we coined this term before. I think it's called Aunty or Uncle Slayer.
Because, you're the Aunty Slayer.
Because you definitely got their heart. Yeah, something to that effect. Yeah, I think you're in that category. So
No, that's good. Sobrang good reputation
That's
yan
good,
because I
yeah.
think I was the opposite naman. Like, I wouldn't know for sure, but I think yung reputation is parang, you can hang out with Stan today.
Yeah, go home. Nah,
Go home
kidding.
early, ah.
I'll go home early. So that's good. At least you never had to like contend with that growing up. I'm actually really happy na, you never got the whole you're too Western spiel.
Yeah.
Sige, go.
No, I mean, I guess like in a way, it's weird. I think maybe if you had this interview with my dad, maybe he'd talk about it differently because even my dad doesn't speak that much Hokkien. So I don't know if it's something that just comes from sheer passage of time, where like with each generation, the expectations of how of how you're supposed to conform to a certain Chinese Filipino image change. I wouldn't say erode, but maybe evolve in a way. So
Right. No, and with the
maybe,
evolution
yeah.
comes a bit of diluting din. Kasi nga, di ba, iba na yung lived experience ng succeeding generation eh.
Yeah, diba? I mean, like, there's dilution, there's mixing, there's also, I guess, like, new expectations about how you're supposed to, like, live your life and have your worldview, diba?
Right. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Speaking of worldviews, yung worldviews natin on transportation, they're ultimately always going to be rooted in class. Like, that's how I've always seen it. Because at its core, diba, that is a class issue pa rin yung transportation, especially when you
Absolutely.
dig into public transportation versus private transportation. So what can you say about that as it relates to Chinoy, specifically the Manila Chinoys, where, we tend to have these classist and elitist tendencies?
Yeah, okay. The funny thing is, before the show, we were talking about Ping Lacson, diba? So
Right.
I think the reason he's so popular with Chinoys, diba, is of course he made a name for himself breaking up the kidnapping cartels that would target Chinese Filipino families, right? And I think
Yes.
for many Chinese Filipino families, that is a concern about like how safe you are, not just in terms of like road safety, not just in terms of whether you'll be hit by a car while crossing the street or riding a bike, but in terms of security, diba? Of like, parang, I think there's the impression that you need to have your own car basically, and you need to like have your own private motor vehicle because it's armor, because at least you can drive away, at least you can parang it's your bubble protecting you from the rest of the world, right? And I think when you get into transportation and when you start to learn and study about what makes good transportation policy, I think that attitude, even though there aren't it's not necessarily a bad reason why people think that, but I mean that trying to solve the security problem in that way just does not make for a sustainable transportation system, because if you want everybody to have their own motorized armored bubble around them, then you just run out of space for everybody else in a city, right? And you end up using up a lot more resources. It becomes much more polluting, and you may be safe in your car, but what happens is when you have a car is you're driving a 2,000-pound bullet around that could kill somebody else, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
the more people are in cars, the less safe it is for people without cars, right?
Yeah.
So, and if you want to live in a city with good public transportation, I mean, those are parang realities, and I like the term. These are facts of geometry that you can't get around. That at some point, you have to do something about that kind of idea, and it's something which I've tried to communicate also, even to my Chinese Filipino relatives that are accepting of many of my other personality traits, but not of my. I think many of them still don't understand why I choose to ride a bike everywhere. I think that's the last parang personal belief of mine that they still find completely insane.
Are there like cities here or places here in Metro Manila that kind of fit your ideals of like a walkable city that's for good for biking?
Well, okay, here's the it's funny. When people ask me about what good urban planning in Manila looks like, I would say that one of my favorite scenes in Metro Manila is Legaspi Village in Makati City. So yeah, when you look at Legaspi Village kasi, it's that here's the thing about it. It doesn't have any bike lanes. It doesn't have any bus lanes. It doesn't have a subway system or anything. So I mean, when people think of transportation, kasi it's like they think of like the big projects like rail and subways and things like that. But in Legaspi Village, it's very simple. It has streets. They don't have bike lanes, but they don't actually need them because they're designed in a way where cars can't really drive fast. So if the cars aren't speeding through, then it's safe for everybody else to be on the street because it's designed in a way where the cars are forced to drive at
So
safe speeds.
yeah.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
very walkable. It has a lot of the old trees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have some big trees there covering wide sidewalks. So it's funny, diba? It's like they have the trees there make it nice, but then at the same time, most other government transport projects are intent on cutting trees down for road widening, diba? People who go to La Union a lot have been talking about how those like that big stretch of trees in Agoo was just like completely raised. I mean, like those like trees that were like decades and hundreds of years old maybe were just all cut down for what? I mean, like a few meters of road on each side. And di naman natin traffic dun eh. So it's like completely like misaligned priorities, diba? But I guess to go back to like where I would say you've got some good urban planning going. One way which I would love to teach those concepts, basically just like walk around a neighborhood like that and just point stuff out to people. And I would say, yeah, Legaspi Village has got a lot of good things going for it. That's an example I like to use.
Yeah, super agree with Legaspi Village though, because I mean I was working there for 3 to 4 years. I jog there. I actually work out in Legaspi Village. I mean at night it's crazy. People jog there. People hold Zumba classes. So I completely agree with you. It's one of the best like places
Yeah.
here in the Philippines. So
Yeah,
hopefully we can have more of that.
yeah. I guess to follow on to that, it's like So I mean, that's the thing. It's like that's the ironic part of it. If it's so good, why is it so rare? And when you
Right.
start to unpack that question, that's if you really try to honestly answer that question, that's how you really learn about how like how urban planning and land use isn't just there's a lot more to it than people in government just being incompetent, diba? When you try to answer that question, you really start to examine like the legacies of Philippine history, about how the legal system was founded, about how the concepts of like land use in America in their colonies were, I guess, like solidified in law and then evolved to protect the interests of even the original colonists of the Philippines, right? So I mean, not to go off on too much of a tangent, but I think that's the other, I guess, notion I have to always like enlighten people on when I talk about my work, that there's a very rich history behind a lot of the urban planning results in the Philippines that goes beyond the statement na ay walang urban planning or wala tayong urban planners or we should hire urban planners instead of generals, for instance. So
It just so happens that there's a lot of mga red tape that's going on. That's why not a lot of these projects like Legaspi Village could be implemented elsewhere.
it's interesting, diba? When you look at like, I think red tape is one thing, but I think red tape just means that you have to comply with a lot of requirements, right?
Oh,
I
okay,
mean,
okay.
see, I mean, well, I mean, not to say that that's entirely wrong. I mean, it's true that there's a lot of red tape, but I think some better questions to ask are, why are the requirements that way to begin with? One of the reasons Legaspi works, for instance, is that you notice when you're walking along the sidewalks in Legaspi that you could basically kind of like walk or jog in peace because the
Yeah.
sidewalks are continuous for like hundreds of meters.
Yeah.
But
Right.
in many other places in the Philippines, in Metro Manila, every now and then you have to step over a driveway because the sidewalk cuts, and
Yeah.
to make way for the driveway to the park entrance of a building. And Legaspi doesn't have any of that, right? Because the buildings in Legaspi Village, a lot of them are so old that they weren't actually required to have parking. So that's
Ah,
just one example, right?
yeah.
And when you don't
Interesting.
have and diba, when you don't have parking requirements, that's why all the parking is on. That's why all of the parking there is on the street
Yeah.
Right.
because the buildings themselves didn't have parking. And when you think about why buildings have parking, many people intuitively think, for instance, that like, oh, buildings should have parking because how will people use them, right? But then when you require buildings to have parking, you can't have Legaspi Village, diba? I think there's a lot to unpack there, and actually, parking is specifically one of my favorite academic topics in transport. Deserves its own podcast. It's like one of the examples in which transportation just becomes this really rich subject that you can really attack from any other area of interest.
I want to go back to you enlightening fellow Chinoys, lalo na the older generation. Kasi I guess the question I asked a few minutes ago was really touching on the lack of empathy that our community generally has. And the reason I bring that up is because it's kind of hard to enlighten the previous generation on things like how public transport versus private transport is inherently classist. So how do you explain these concepts to them in ways na madadigest nila? Because their worldview is different, and they're operating the best way they know how, which admittedly might not be the best way to do things now.
Yeah, Stan, I think the choice of words here is interesting and important because I would say that when you actually talk to Chinoys, actually when I talk to people, when I try, when I have the emotional energy to do the emotional labor of trying to get into those discussions with people. Kasi, aminin natin nakakapagod siya, di ba?
Yeah, sobra.
But I think the way I've come to learn about it is that, it's not that Chinoys don't have empathy, but it's what we talked about earlier, di ba? It's like this, we kind of teach people to, we teach young Chinoys to suppress their empathy in order to not rock the boat, right? In order to not to basically shirk the responsibility to society of trying to improve it. So it's not that people don't have empathy. It's just that they've learned to suppress it and bottle it up. So that's also why I think it causes a lot of angst for people. Nah, it's not about not having empathy, but then you kind of teach people to kind of look at the situation that makes you feel awful in society, and they say, what can you do? Ganyan talaga eh. And when you say ganyan talaga, I mean masakit yung sabihin, di ba? I mean, it's not that you say that and then it feels better. You say that and you feel worse. So,
right. So wala kang magagawa about it. You feel powerless.
Wala kang magagawa. Yeah, so it's really learned helplessness, and more than learned helplessness, it's taught helplessness.
So how do you address that? How do you even begin to have the conversation, knowing that nuance?
Yeah, okay. I think the thing I would first tell people is, of course, I mean, cheap shot, but then you first have to recognize it. But you're not, hindi ka manhid, di ba? You're just learning how to parang nilulunok mo lang yung feelings mo eh. You're just you're basically trying to suppress your empathy and not give a shit about people in order to conform to this Chinese Filipino stereotype about what you have to be. So I think maybe what I would like to teach people is that it's okay to want something better. It's okay to dream better. It's okay to dream of a better world, beyond just doing well in your business, beyond just doing well in your job, right? That's fine. You can have those feelings, and when you have those feelings, it's legitimate to talk about them, and it's legitimate to talk about them. It's legitimate to act on them, and that's okay. And it's gonna be different for every person. But I think the most important part there is learning how to not shut off that empathy, and I think that really lets people have be fuller people and live fuller lives. Because for a lot of people, that's really where they want to be. I think I truly believe that most people are empathic and want to see and have bigger dreams for how the society wants to be, from being Chinese Filipinos, right? But I think the first step talaga is learning how to tap into that part of yourself.
That totally makes sense. I guess to just start winding down here, knowing na yung nga, kailangan nga natin yung sense of empathy, diba, to be able to strive towards something better. How can we do that now, especially in light of the pandemic? We're all stuck at home to keep ourselves safe. What can we do to improve things like road safety, to improve things like walkability at the local level, from our homes or from wherever we're at?
Yeah, okay. I think maybe I guess as very general tips. I guess for my for everyone listening to this podcast, if you drive a car or drive a motorcycle, I think maybe I guess the biggest tip I would have in terms of how to be a more empathic person and a more empathic citizen in society, to use a transport example is you can always learn to be a better road user. I think one thing which I would always like to have people experiment with, if you want to really practice being a better public citizen, is what if you drove the actual speed limit in the Philippines? And in many parts of Metro Manila, the default speed limit, many people don't know this, but it's actually 30 kilometers per hour or lower. And that's the speed limit in the Land Transportation Code for people operating motor vehicles close to quote-unquote crowded streets. So, when you drive 30 kph, you don't actually go that much slower. Your overall journey doesn't take that much longer, but you're much safer for any other road user. If you it makes you more aware of your surroundings. You actually see more of the road. and you're much safer for like any pedestrians or cyclists that you happen to drive closer by. So I would say that if you want to, I guess, like practice being empathic, try driving slower and think about how much safer that makes the roads for every other person. So that's it's not easy to do, especially when the drivers behind you who are less empathic are like honking at you. But I would say for anyone that's I guess like that wants to practice that kind of empathy, especially if you have a car, that's one way to do it. It's not easy, but things worth doing are rarely that easy.
Yeah, and if you're having a hard time remembering yung basic like speed limits and everything, I think Waze helps out with that, diba? It's generally programmed to observe yung speed limits in any given city that you're driving at. So ako, like when I have my Waze on, I'm generally alerted naman. Like when I see that red dun sa speedometer ng Waze, natatakot na ako. So okay, I'm gonna slow down a bit. So that's a totally practical way to try to improve road safety at the local level, diba? Like when you have to go out and buy your groceries and shit.
Yeah. I think that's really important. I think maybe even more than that. If you, I think when you learn to ride a bike, I mean, like again, I'm not gonna say it's a sacrifice. I don't do anything out of a sense of sacrifice. When I say that I don't just say it. I mean, actually ride a bike everywhere. Actually have been bike commuting so much that whenever I step into a car, I almost feel car sick kasi hindi na ako sanay. So I think I step into a car maybe less than once a month at this point. So it's and I think maybe if you have a bike lying around at home, I would say, of course, to anyone who's listening, who's been afraid of like taking their bike out on the roads, one day, if you feel just courageous enough, try it. It's I think one of the best things you can do for yourself.
That's really cool, Anton. I mean, are there any projects that you were actually like really proud of? I mean, it could be like a current project or a project that you did before, like maybe just so you can let all of our listeners and viewers like say never, oh, I actually did that, kind of like that.
Sure. I think one of the projects that I was really proud to work on in Pasig City was really expanding the bike parking in City Hall and around government buildings. I think bike parking is always overlooked, but also really important because if you have a strong biker, for instance, there are many strong bikers in the Philippines who bike commute, even if there are no bike lanes. But then if there's no bike parking, even strong bikers won't commute if their bike is threatened to be stolen, right? So that's one thing. I think bike parking is really important. We should have more projects that focus on bike parking. But I think I'm also really proud of a bunch of the new bike lanes we've put up in Pasig. There's still a lot of political opposition to them, especially along the major streets in Pasig, like among Rodriguez Avenue and C. Raimundo Avenue. Just because they're parang a lot of people have the impression na parang ang traffic na sa Pasig, parang lalagyan mo pa ng bike lane. But then, and it's the same thing. I mean, people would react that way, whether you put a bike lane, whether you put a bus lane, and whether you put a sidewalk, for instance. But then I think what people have to realize, and this is math that many people don't intuitively understand, is that if you have even a sidewalk or a bike lane, you carry so many more people per hour than if you had a car lane. I think the numbers are actually, it's kind of stupid just how much of an advantage even having a sidewalk has versus having a car. You just move so many more people in the same amount of land. So I'm really proud of like how, of course, with the help of all of our partners and with the help of our mayor, that we were able to do all of that. It got really interesting, and I think there's still many challenges. But you look around the Philippines today and Metro Manila, there are so many more protected bike lanes than there were a few years ago. And I think the credit for that belongs, not really to myself, but with the general movement of having more people in the Philippines who are in these positions of implementing these projects that know what it's like to bike commute every day.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to end the podcast. But on that note, we're a little bit hopeful. God, what a concept. But if people want to get in touch with you, Anton, if they want to spitball with you on things like transportation, road safety, or just want to be more aware about what's going on, where can people find you? Where can people engage you in civil, polite, maybe a little bit of shitposting discourse?
Yeah, I would say we can drop it in the show notes, siguro. But then, of course, How's Your Biyahe Best? Got to plug that. Best group on Facebook. And on Twitter, I've recently changed my name, but I think people listening probably have the right idea. So it's at Good Kid Bike City. So
Kendrick Lamar. Good one.
good kid, bike city. So that's basically it. So yeah, I mean, it's been great, and yeah, if you anybody listening wants to catch up, just like drop me a tweet, say hi on HYBB. We can do whatever. It's really fun.
All right. Anton, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule and joining us and, just enlightening us on a lot of these things. Like kami tatlo, I'm sure we also picked up something new. Diba? I really appreciated how you also took your time to try to realign the way that we see things. Because even us, diba, in our generation, we sometimes get too skewed with the ways that we see things. And it's always nice to have a different perspective. So thank you so much for sharing that with us here on the podcast.
Of course, happy to be here, and really nice to get to share my evening with you guys tonight.
On that note, we got to end this episode and this season of Now Steaming.
Yeah.
So thank you so much to everybody who's been a part of it, all of the guests we've had on so far. Thank you to everybody who's been sharing the podcast, letting people know that we exist. Thank you na rin dun sa mga creepy guys na nag-a-add kay Kim on Facebook without even sending her a message. Thank you na rin sa inyo. Sana pakinggan nyo yung content. Utang na loob. But yeah, thank you to everybody. We really appreciate it. Hell, thank you, Sed and Kim, for indulging me and creating this space with me where we can talk to other Chinoys like Anton, like Vince and Ed, like Dr. Angela Yu about all of these things that really make our identity worth breaking down and deconstructing.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed all these like 10 episodes. I mean, it's so, most of the time it's like, oh man, we're ending this podcast. There's just still a lot to, break down or still a lot to talk about. But yeah, thank you guys for joining us this season. And hopefully, for season 2, we'll have more in store for you. And yes, to all the creepy guys who are messaging me, adding me on Facebook or on Instagram or wherever, please do send me a message instead on how we can collaborate, because it's just really weird that you guys are just adding me. Yeah, collaborate. I mean, that would be really nice instead of just adding me and I don't really know what you want, right? So I appreciate it that you guys listen to the podcast, but hopefully we can have some collaboration or maybe we can do something together in the future. But yeah,
Kevin Dan, we're looking at you.
Yeah. And speaking of like podcasts, guys, you can follow us on Facebook, on Instagram, as well as Twitter. So that's at Now Steaming Podcast. And on Twitter, it's at Now Steaming Pod. And if you guys want to drop us a line, you want to talk about something, open up a conversation, or maybe, it's something you want us to talk about in season 2, do let us know as well. That's that is Now Steaming Podcast at gmail.com. Hope I got that right.
Right.
Yes, you did. Absolutely. Said, where can people find you?
Right. Actually, when you guys message the social media pages, I'm the one who's responding in the inbox. So yeah, and I thank you for all those who messaged our pages and also messaged me personally. I appreciate all of your reactions and your insights. And fun fact as well, I'm also I'm also a fan of urban planning and transportation because ever since as a kid, I enjoyed playing SimCity. So that was my thing. So I think everybody, all of our viewers, and also I've had some suggestions as well for season 2 topics. So I hope that we can implement it there as well. So
yeah, keep them coming. Keep them coming. Hit us up at Cedric C. Cheng, at Kimberly Mas, at _Stan C. That's STANSY. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to have more ideas heading into season 2. We're taking a break for now just to get our ducks in a row. But in the meantime, we also want to let everybody know that voter registration is still ongoing, especially in areas na naka-GCQ. So please go ahead and do that if you can. Not sure how it is here in Metro Manila, so it's best to check with your local COMELEC branch. Importante talaga that we be part of the 2022 elections, both on the national level and on the local level. So please participate in that. Please also stay safe. Wear double masks if you can. Get your vaccines if you can. And we just hope that we're all around and alive for season 2 of Now Steaming. So on behalf of our guest, Anton C., the transfer chief of Pasig City, on behalf of my co-hosts, Cedric Cheng and Kimberly Mas, my name is Stan C. Thank you so much for spending all this time with us. And like I said, we hope we're all alive for season 2 of Now Steaming. Peace. We're out of here. Bye-bye.